Hello and welcome to your first lecture on communication perspectives. What I'm going to do in this particular video today is give you a very quick breakdown of the technology I'm using to record it and then also walk you through your lecture for this particular chapter. Now, I'm using Screencast-O-Matic right now simply because to me it is one of the most accessible forms of software out there for screencasting. Although I will be modeling, if you watch my other videos or are a student in one of my classes, you'll be able to see me using Prezi Video and also Zoom. But Communication Perspectives is going to be the first lecture in a series that I'm doing for a Vertibird and CellNow textbook. And you can go through those as much as you need to. If you're a student of mine, the odds are you will be giving a presentation at some point in a class with me. And so I want to use these lectures to have the dual purpose of introducing you to different forms of technology. Screencast-O-Matic has the ability to be focused on webcam only, visual only, or what I have now, which is dual purpose and has both. For a presentation, it's very handy if you need to show a visual and yourself at the same time. Personally, Prezi Video, which I'll model in a different video, allows you to focus on yourself more than the visual, but Screencast-O-Matic focuses on the visual more than yourself. So you kind of have to make a judgment call on what form fits what you're being asked to do. So today I'm going to give you a quick 15 or 20 minute walkthrough in your chapter. If you have the textbook, whether it's ebook or physical, you should be able to follow along quite easily in your notes. I do recommend that you take notes just as if you were in a live lecture. I would also suggest that you pause me if I go too quickly or if I'm moving through the chapter and you want to stay and sit in the chapter for a moment to do some highlighting and annotating. So the beauty of online lectures is that you can pause and rewind as many times as you want to, as opposed to hoping that the instructor will slow down. That said, these are 15 or 20-minute videos. These are not hour-and-a-half long lectures like you would typically get in a live classroom experience. So these are meant to guide you through the high points of each chapter and give you what you need, but you are expected to study more yourself. If you're watching this to study for a random test in class, this will hit the high points. So to begin, let's get into what our communication is here for today. So, the first thing that we're going to be talking about would be the nature of communication. And communication itself is essentially an exchange program. We are sending and receiving messages. There are things that get in the way, but there are a lot of reasons why we do it. So, messages are essentially whatever it is you're attempting to communicate. Of course, we're familiar with text messages and emails and so on and so forth. And now you're probably learning through a different venue of virtual learning or a YouTube video. But the message is essentially what you want to communicate. Now, encoding is what a speaker does before information falls out of their face. So if you want to use me as an example, before I recorded this video, I had to make this PowerPoint. I had to think through what I wanted to say. I had to go through the textbook and figure out what items I wanted to communicate to you. And that lengthy thought process is essentially encoding. So if you want a cheat sheet for your notes, speakers encode. It is inside your head and you're preparing yourself for what you want to say. If you're the type of person who doesn't have a personal filter and whatever you think comes out of your face, you probably don't encode all that much. The people who sit back and really kind of program their conversations before they happen are those that use encoding much more, I would say frequently. Decoding is essentially what listeners are going to do. So whenever you receive a message, you're having to decode it to see if it makes sense. Like right now, you are watching a video. I'm over here in the corner talking through my webcam with my headset on. You've got a visual in front of you. You may have this open in one window and your ebook open in another. Whatever it is, you're having to decode the examples and descriptions that I'm giving you and see if they make sense. If you were in a live interaction like a conversation or a lecture, you might be able to raise your hand and ask a question to clarify. In a virtual setting, you pretty much have to take what's given you, write your questions as you're going, and then reach out through a different venue to get those questions answered. If you are in one of my classes, I do highly recommend that you do email me with any questions. If you're trying to decode and that decoding function in your brain's just not working so well, then email me and ask me a question. I'll be happy to answer it for you. Now, of course, that leads into beautifully, conveniently, this next point of feedback, which are the responses that we receive and provide after the message has been communicated. While I'm lecturing in class, like in a live class situation, I have eye contact, I have nods and smiles, I have raised hands, I have nonverbal and verbal interaction feedback live to see whether I need to speed up, slow down, re explain, move on. If you're in a virtual setting, the feedback I'm getting is essentially the cold, soulless eye of my webcam. So I'm just going to click right on through at the same old pace because there is no other feedback for me to come off of unless my computer indicates some type of disapproval. So, the feedback we receive in a virtual environment would be emails, comments, interactions. If we have live Zoom meetings, for instance, what would you say and what would you ask and what would you contribute? Do you have a discussion forum where you could chat about the lecture content or ask for assistance? So, feedback again is just the response that you receive. If you've waved at your friend and they wave back at you, then you have received feedback. If you've ever tried to talk to somebody while they're watching a movie, writing an email, or playing a video game, you're not going to get as much feedback because there is distraction, which we will get to presently. Now, there are a lot of different communication contexts out there. A textbook goes into a lot of good detail, but I'm just going to hit the high points on these. First off, your physical location is going to have a hefty impact on the effectiveness of the communication you have. One of the strengths to virtual learning is that you can fold it around your life and your schedule. But one of the weaknesses is that we tend to multitask whenever anything virtual is involved. For myself personally, I cannot sit and watch a TV program to save my life unless I have a book or maybe I'll fill out paperwork. Very often I'm grading, I'm multitasking the entire time with different levels of success. Some research says that multitasking is really amazing, and other research says that we actually just end up being bad at everything whenever we multitask. So, whenever you think about communicating, especially in a learning environment, when it comes to your physical location, I want you to be very self aware and set yourself up for success. Try to remove distractions, remove noise and interference, put yourself in a place where you can focus and listen and take notes, and don't be afraid to put in those earbuds and hide from the world for a little while. Another context would be the social relationship that you might have with the person you're communicating with. The level of familiarity you have with someone is going to dictate the type of communication that you have. Think of your best friend versus me. My best friend's not in my classes, so I can say that safely. You don't know me yet, and you might not know me that well. You'll know me in an instructor or a YouTuber capacity. So you don't really have the relationship built there to know how I'm going to respond if you say or ask something. However, you do have that relationship with close family or best friends that you know you can get away with saying just about anything because that platform of understanding and mutual respect is already there. Another context would be the historical background. Now, this could mean truly the history you've had with that person, the prior experiences you've had. This also could be something like, say, that you're interviewing for a job and you've never had an interview before. You don't have a lot of historical background with that position. So, what do? Versus someone who's interviewed 20, 30, 40, 50 times, they're going to have a little bit more level of comfort because of their prior experiences. On that note, psychological mood or how you're feeling and how you're feeling about that communication interaction is also going to impact the efficacy of your particular communication. So, if you're in a really bad mood, do you communicate or do you not? This is personal to you. If I'm in a terrible mood, I generally want to talk about it and then just leave it. Like, I just need to get it out of my psyche and then leave it alone. But other people might not want to talk about it at all. You'll hear me talk about my husband quite a lot in these lectures because if you ever want to learn about communication, get married. And so my husband's completely different. If he's in a negative mood, communicating is the worst possible thing he can do. So he just separates and distances from the situation until he's realigned that psychological mood with the communication that needs to happen. Another psychological mood and how that can impact your communication could be anxiety or apprehension. You're in a class with me, which is going to focus on public speaking and presenting. So, the way that you feel about public speaking is really going to heavily impact the amount you're able to kind of pull out of these lectures. So, lastly, on this one, there's also your cultural orientation. We are all raised and cultured differently. There are no two people in this class that are going to have the exact same experience and background that you do. So, one, celebrate that diversity and be excited that people have different lives so we can learn from their experiences, their historical backgrounds, and psychological moods. But also be open to learning about how different people communicate differently. My husband's biracial, and so his background and raising and how you communicate is completely different from mine. And that ends up being very entertaining for us because we have to communicate about communicating. It's called meta communication. So anytime meta is in front of something, it means about. So meta communication would be communicating about communicating. And one of the impacts of cultural orientation is that we are so used to what is normal for us that we forget that it's not normal for other people. My family has huge get togethers. We'll have like 70 to 100 people together for Thanksgiving, and you eat for like 6 hours, and the noise is insane. On my husband's side of the family, there are 4 people total for Thanksgiving, and they don't talk. You can imagine how fun that first Thanksgiving was for me because I was completely lost and confused. So, cultural orientation, huge. Be open to other people's normal and ask questions when you're not sure. There are a lot of different communication settings that we can get into. If you take any communication class, it'll go over these. So, if you've had public speaking, you probably know these. If not, we're going to click through them pretty quickly. Intrapersonal communication is communication inside yourself. This is you communicating with you. Think meta you. So, you communicating with yourself. These would be our thought processes, our opinions, our evaluations, those things that we encode and may or may not come out of our mouth later, but just anything that's going on inside of your head. So, this is your self talk. This could be self criticism. This could be self esteem, but it's your communication with you. Interpersonal communication means communication with others. INTER, that prefix INTER means between or across. So this is communication between or across people. So it's outside of you, it's reaching out, it's an interconnection. Again, interconnection, connection between. On a test, please make sure that you're very aware since those first 2 terms are only 2 letters apart from each other. If you're nervous and you're speed reading through a test, it's really easy to get those mixed up and miss a question. So in your notes, it would probably be worth writing the 2 letters that are different, like in capitals, just to make sure they're emphasized which one is which, because I would hate for you to miss a test question simply because you sped read through a question. Small group communication, this is communication in small groups. This could be a work group, this could be a student group, any type of thing where you have generally more than 3 people. 3 to 12 is generally the accepted rule of thumb for a small group. We will have small group communication if you're in one of my classes. Mass communication is when communication goes out to hundreds of thousands of people. This is something like the internet, advertising, billboards, TV, commercials, film, anything that reaches out to masses of people. The last communication setting you might encounter would be public speaking or public communication, and that's going to be focused on significantly. And this is generally when one person is representing to a group of people that is larger than a small group, but doesn't quite reach out to mass. Now, if you are someone that's going to be giving a presentation at a major event that could technically be televised, that would turn into mass communication. But generally, public speaking is larger than a small group, but smaller than mass communication. Now, the communication process is pretty lengthy. There are a lot of different components here, so please feel free to pause and rewind as many times as you need to. And we're going to go ahead and kick into it with some visuals. Now, the communication process, as you can see here, isn't as simple as I speak, you listen, or you speak and then I listen. Those are parts of it, but there are more pieces to it than that. You do need to be aware of these. If you're in one of my classes, this will show up on a future test. So, first off, we have message production. This is exactly what it sounds like. This is when the message is produced. This means as a speaker, I encoded it in my brain and I sent it out. So, this video right now is message production. It is being sent to you. And then you are currently in step two, where you are interpreting that communication. This is when you're decoding. You're sitting there and thinking through it. Is this making sense? Am I on board? Is it too fast, too slow? Then we have to interact and coordinate with each other. This is when the communication kind of gets sent back a little bit of feedback there. We're having to adjust communication styles. If I'm in a live lecture, I might have a student raise their hand and say, "Hey, you're going a little bit too fast. Can you slow down?" Or I might have another student that says, "Hey, can you tell me what number one was again?" And that's when we're interacting and coordinating that communication with each other. Think of phone conversations you have with people, for those of you that still speak on the phone as opposed to text messaging. You have to kind of coordinate who's talking when. Otherwise, both of you are going to talk at the same time. Neither one of you will get any information done. You hang up, and who knows why you were on the phone in the first place. The next thing that we're going to have would be the channel. And the channel is like a TV channel where you have like 300 different TV channels. A channel is the method used for the communicating. Okay? It is the method used to communicate. So this could be a screencast. It could be a PowerPoint, letter, text message, phone call, handwritten letter, email, whatever it is, a shout across the parking lot. It's basically, how did you communicate with that person? If you're in a virtual course with me, you have 5 to 7 different ways, different channels that you can use to communicate with me or to find information out about the class. Media richness is exactly what it sounds like. This is kind of the enrichment, the way that the information was communicated to you. Was it in an effective channel? Was it in something that connected with your experience and background? Did you know the way that you were being communicated with? Were you familiar with it? Was it presented to you in multiple ways? Did someone just hand you a textbook and say good luck? Or did you have a lecture? Did you have a visual component with an instructor? Or was it just the endless voice droning on and on over a PowerPoint? What is it? So, what was used to get in touch with you? Now, synchronicity is a wonderful word, and this is essentially how well our messages sync or line up with each other's. Is when you're in sync, you're both communicating and interpreting very effectively. You're connected, you know what's going on, we're doing well, we are on the same page, we are synchronized. But of course, something that can interfere with synchronicity would be noise. So, interference and noise are anything that get in the way of the communication happening, anything that interrupts or takes away from the focus on the message. This is where earlier, when I talked about context and the importance of a physical location, you might have me droning on in your head right now. But if you're in the middle of a busy Starbucks and you're hearing all this noise and they're over there making a frappuccino or whatever it might be, and there's so much noise and people and distraction, and oh, went there when an interesting person, then you are going to be interfered with and your focus is going to be lost and you're not going to be able to pay the level of attention that you probably should in order to get something. I'm sure most of us have been in situations where you were there, you were present when a message was communicated, but somehow it just didn't stick. And then about 7 hours later, you have that oh moment where that light bulb goes off, and there's the information we needed 6 hours ago. So interference is anything that gets in the way. And that could be, I mean, that noise could be internal noise. I don't really mean your stomach. That could mean like your emotional noise. It could be external noise. I'm hoping you can't hear it, but the reason I have a headset instead of a formal microphone, or I don't use my webcam microphone, is because over here I have a 55-gallon fish tank that has two filters that are waterfall filters constantly droning on with water. So if you hear kind of like a Zen garden in the background, that would be my fish tank. So I have to use a headset and change my technology in order to, raise the efficacy of my message production. If I didn't have that, the noise would be so much that you would seriously just be hearing a waterfall in the background the entire time. So your textbook, this is copied directly from your textbook, has an image of a communication model, and it takes all the information I just gave you and kind of puts it in its place. You can see the physical interference. You can see psychological. Again, that's your internal emotional interference. The participants who are sending out verbal and nonverbal messages through channels. We're surrounded by our location, our context of the communication, and it's influenced by the way that the relationship we do or do not have with that person person and the historical background that we have with that information. So it all kind of comes together, which is the point of this lecture. So the characteristics of communication, communication has purpose. I'm going to just click through these. These are all actually pretty simple to understand, so make sure you have your textbook on this one, but they're just really one-word statements. Communication always has a reason. That's why we have it, so it has purpose. Communication is continuous. It means we don't turn it off. Even if you're sleeping, you're communicating. Are you sleeping well? Are you dreaming? What level of sleep are you in? If you're sitting by yourself in the corner of a room with a hoodie pulled over your face, you're still communicating. You're communicating that no one should talk to you, but you're still communicating. It is irreversible. Once it's been done, you cannot take it back, unless it's a video that I can delete later, but the internet never forgets, so the internet's got it. It's irreversible. No matter what you say or do, once that information's out there, you can't bring it back. It is situated in a setting. It happens somewhere. The context of my communication with you right now is through video. Your context for me later might be a Zoom meeting or a live face-to-face meeting or an email. It is indexical, which is essentially a fancy textbook word for saying that communication can be measured. We are able to measure how effective or ineffective communication was. If something doesn't work, it's your job to change it for the future. So that's kind of what we want to do here. It does change. It's very variable. This means that it is going to, my communication has changed greatly. I started teaching about 10, 12 years ago, and the way that I teach now is worlds apart from the way I used to teach because I realized, okay, here are the strengths, here are the weaknesses, here's what students can do, and here's what I need to do. Normative. Norms are accepted standards of behavior. This means you're normal. So communication does have the characteristic of having what is considered to be normal. And of course, there are things that are considered to be abnormal. We'll talk about those in future lectures. But communication, all you need to know is that it does have norms, and norms are accepted standards of behavior. Now, the ethics of communication are here for you in this class and in your life and in communication. You should be honest. You should have integrity. You should be fair. You do need to respect those that you communicate with, and you do need to be a responsible party. You are responsible for your communication. I don't care what emotional state you're in, you choose what to communicate. And the sooner in your life that you accept responsibility for that, the better your life's going to be because you're going to be a mature individual. You need to respect people that you communicate with, even if you don't like them, or even if you don't disagree, or I should say, if you don't agree with them. But you need to respect, you need to be fair. But really, to me, the hallmark for this one is you need to accept responsibility for your communication. That's on you. Now, that said, in your textbook, I absolutely adore this. It has the bright side and the dark side of technology. If I had access or of communication, if I had access to the copyright, I would just have a big picture of Darth Vader above the dark side right now. But unfortunately, that's protected by a lot of copyright laws. The bright side of communication is essentially communication that has been ethical and appropriate. The dark side is when something has been unethical or inappropriate. I feel like that's a little bit repetitive from what I've already talked about in the previous slide, but your textbook separated out, and anytime you have an excuse to use the dark side in conversation, quite frankly, I think you should. So getting to the end of it here, this is going to be one of our longer lectures. I promise you other videos will be shorter, but the first one always takes some time. When it comes to communication competence, this has to do with how effective of a communicator you are. And that's going to be based on your credibility or trustworthiness. We're going to talk about this a lot whenever we get into actual presentation development. But your credibility or your trustworthiness is really going to show whether or not you're competent or capable. Social ease is another one. A lot of us do experience communication anxiety and communication apprehension, and social ease is our ability to moderate that and hide it. Think of going to a job interview that you really desperately want to get the job at. Your stomach might be churning, but your face and your body and your voice are all communicating relaxation and comfort. I would recommend that we really do talk about this quite a bit. Social ease is something you do have to practice. You do get used to it over time. It is just you pretty much faking your body out until it gets with the program and realizes you're going to survive the situation. I just mentioned it, but communication apprehension is generally some form of anxiety or nervousness associated with communicating at all. Public speaking anxiety is the terror or anxiety related to public speaking in front of people. But communication apprehension is essentially a feeling of discomfort about any form of communicating. Like if you've ever had that anxiety pulling up to a drive-through and figuring out how you're going to order your tacos without making a fool out of yourself, that's communication apprehension. Just about every human on the face of the planet does experience this to some level. Some levels are worse than others. And your ability to control that, acknowledge it, and deal with it is how your social ease is essentially established. So, last thing today would be your plan to improve your communication because that's the whole point of this class. For those of you who are kind of logging into this class wondering why on earth do I have to take a class that focuses on communication? Well, it's because it's a learned process. Communication is a skill set that you have to learn just like anything else, whether it's mechanics, engineering, playing the piano. You have to learn how to do it well. You might know how to do some, but this is how to know how to do it well, like beautifully, powerfully, effectively, lifelong habit here. You will use it. So, what you need to do, and what I would encourage you to do in closing for this particular lecture, is as soon as I stop talking here in a minute, I want you to sit down and answer these particular questions in your notes. You can share them with me via email if you'd like, or a Zoom meeting, but whatever it is, I want you to figure out, is there an area of your life where your communication could stand improvement? The answer is yes. If you're not nervous about public speaking, that's not your problem. But maybe you talk too much and your friends feel left out. Identify that as the problem. Maybe you're horrified of having to order at Taco Bell and you've wanted tacos for 3 years, but you can't get past the drive through. Identify that as the problem. Have a goal in mind for where you want to be by the end of this class, the end of this term, okay? So, what is an area that you want to improve? Where do I want to be? Then try to link the two together. So have problem here and goal here, and give me a step by step for what you think you would need to do in order to achieve that goal. And then lastly, give yourself some measure of success. Like I mentioned a minute ago, that communication was indexical, which means it is measurable. So how can you measure how well you're doing? How can you measure if you are improving? Did you just want to throw up instead of throwing up this time? Were you able to get to the order of the drink before you stumbled? I don't care. But give yourself some method here. So can you stand some improvement? Where do you want to go? How are you going to get there? And how do you know when you've gotten there? So have fun. Sorry for the long lecture. That'll probably be the longest video of the entire semester if you're in class with me. But enjoy your day. Give yourself some thought. Take a minute. Do this. I'll ask you about it later, I'm sure. Have a good one.